2020. Disasters are contained in these instruments with relief through community development block grant funding and other relief as well. And our biggest concern, biggest need is to make sure that we get the community development block grant funding for disaster recovery that we need for our unmet need for housing. And that's the single biggest focus of the trip, although we're having conversations about everything that we are discussing. But we think that we have well over $900 million in unmet need on housing alone for the 2020 storms in Louisiana. And in addition to that, state and local governments will have to meet the obligations to pay the non-federal cost share, things like public assistance and the hazard mitigation grant program. And that could be in the $130 to $150 million range. And so we really appreciate the fact that the appropriations instruments that are pending before Congress right now would allow us the flexibility to use CDBG funds to meet those match obligations. Because when you have been slammed by as many storms as we have in Louisiana during a pandemic, and so it's not just the hurricanes, as you know, it is also the winter storm, the May flood, all during the pandemic, our local governmental entities have really been stretched. And so to get the flexibility to meet our non-federal obligations on match from CDBG is going to be critically important. But we also have to have enough funding in order to make that a real benefit, because the first thing you have to do is the housing. And so you need to have enough CDBG funding on top of that so that we can do the non-federal match obligations. But we are in a much better place today than we were before. Obviously, no bill has passed, but the reception we have received here from Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, and certainly by Louisiana's congressional delegation, and they're working as hard as they can to speed relief and make sure that relief is adequate. And so I believe that both in this instrument and in appropriation instruments to follow, especially one in early December, that we're going to be successful in bringing home significant assistance to Louisiana. I won't be able to be more specific on the dollar amounts because the agencies are going to have to determine how much of that is actually going to come to our state and for which disasters relative to the other states. But I think I'm going to stop here, but I want to thank y'all for taking the time to cover this. And I want to thank everyone here in Washington who took the time to meet with me this week. And I will take a few questions. Shauna, if you're ready for that.
Yes, good morning, Governor. Thank you. And yes, if you would please raise your hand so that we can see who would like to ask a question. And we'll go with Blake Patterson from the Ad.
Blake,
Ike, if you could unmute him.
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Blake.
Obviously, you were in D.C. this week with all these partisan battles stirring. I mean, what do you make of the fact that it seems this disaster aid is sort of being held hostage in this bill in the Senate? I mean, what do you make of this this partisanship that we're seeing and with this disaster aid in the middle of it?
Well, first of all, I think anytime you have too much partisanship on any issue, it's unfortunate. That is especially true when it could threaten. I don't think it's going to threaten whether we get assistance or ultimately how much assistance we get. It may threaten the timing of that a little bit. But I'm also heartened because whether I was talking to Republicans or Democrats, House or Senate members of the administration and so forth, everyone supports the disaster relief component that is in the continuing resolution. The question is whether the disaster relief becomes collateral damage to some larger unrelated issue that does involve more partisanship. I hope that they can work their way through it. I feel very confident that while the next few days may have a lot of back and forth, that ultimately and sometime before the end of the month, I believe you're going to see the passage of an instrument with the relief in it for disasters. And then you're going to see continued efforts to solidify the damage estimates and justify additional funding, potentially for 2020 and for 2021, that can be incorporated into an appropriations instrument that would be pending before Congress in early December. So that's, look, I'm here asking for help for Louisiana. You know, there is too much partisanship, but I haven't seen it as it relates to specifically what it is that we're requesting. So I am very encouraged, in fact, by the way that we have been received here in Washington, D.C. this week.
And our next question will go to Greg Hilburn from Gannett.
Good morning, Governor. You mentioned the top priority was for housing. When I'm going to ask you about a timeline for housing. As you well know, there's folks staying in tents and kind of makeshift ramshackle structures because there's really no place else to stay as they try to rebuild. And many others don't even have that option to go back into the hardest hit areas to begin rebuilding. What's your sense? Does that have to wait on an instrument, or is there aid coming?
No, Greg, first of all, thank you for the question. And so the immediate housing needs can be and should be met by FEMA. FEMA already has an emergency relief fund that is available to it. And we're waiting final decisions from FEMA on the next steps with respect to housing. You know, so for example, we've seen them after disasters. Will it look like travel trailers in people's yards? Will it look like travel trailer parks? Will it look like, especially in South Louisiana, closer to the coast, you know, things like flotels and barges? Will there be permanent housing construction component to it? And it's not as if FEMA isn't helping now, because they have been helping. We have essential working lodging that is available throughout the impacted region. And we currently have about 25,000 people in hotels through the Transitional Shelter Assistance Program. And you know, we're closing our shelters, the congregant shelters, which is good. That's the right thing to do as power is restored and more people can go home. But your point is well taken. There are a lot of homes that are destroyed to the point where people cannot live in them. And they certainly want to be there close to their home so that they can start to rebuild. And we're working with FEMA to try to speed the decision making and that assistance. And it's not as if nothing is being done now, but we do need to get to the next step so that we can bring additional assistance to bear for the general population in the affected region just as quickly as possible. And I'm hopeful that FEMA will be making some announcements in the very near future about what those more robust response efforts are going to look like. But that very near term is all related to FEMA. They have the funding that they need. What I'm here this week with respect to housing is the more permanent repairs of those individuals who sustain damage to their homes at low to moderate income. They don't have insurance and that sort of thing. And we need to have a permanent housing program. And that's typically delivered through the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery funding that is administered by HUD. Unfortunately, that is a disaster-specific appropriation. And then for every appropriation, there's a new set of rules that come out with a Federal Register notice. And it's difficult to bring that to bear very quickly. But I am heartened that we're here talking about CDBG for Ida victims, you know, less than a month after landfall, at least to get started. Very disappointed that we're 13 months after Hurricane Laura, but at least we have an instrument now that has some funding for Laura in it as well. And then we'll know if this instrument is passed, at least within 30 days of its passage, HUD will have to tell Louisiana what our allocation will be. And we're going to continue all the way through that process. And even after it is necessary, if we don't believe it's enough for us to execute the kind of program that we need for a robust recovery in Louisiana.
Okay, next we're going to go to Wesley Muller, I believe is the correct pronunciation. If you could identify your agency, please.
Yeah, you got it right. With the Louisiana Illuminator. Good morning, Governor. I wanted to follow up about the FEMA housing. As far as temporary housing goes, are we going to see more and more FEMA trailers, or are folks going to remain in hotel rooms? And what do you believe is the current need as far as numbers?
Yep. Well, the need is being developed every day, and that is part of the process where FEMA is talking to every household that registers for assistance. And Wesley, what I think you're going to see is it's sort of going to be an all of the above approach, and for those people whose home is just unlivable, and they own their own home, oftentimes what they really want is the ability to live on their property. And so that looks more like a travel trailer on their property hooked into the electric grid and also into plumbing. And then there will be renters who don't have that option, and they could be moved to a trailer park, and it could look like manufactured housing units or potentially travel trailers and so forth. And then, of course, TSA can be extended for a while so that those people who want to and can stay in a hotel, that they can continue to do that at least until that program runs its course. But that's not the case. As I just told you, about 25,000 people are currently in hotels. So it's really going to look like an all of the above approach. But that's something that FEMA runs directly. And so I can't get in front of them and say exactly what it's going to look like until they make all of their decisions. And I do think that we're going to have some information forthcoming in the next few days from FEMA about what that picture is going to look like.
And our last question will go to Be Our Proud. John?
Yes, Governor. I was wanting to ask, I guess, specifically about the Southwest Louisiana in relation to Laura and Delta, in terms of, I guess, more of a long-term housing situation or program that could come from this legislation. If you could expand upon that a little bit, please.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm gratified that there is CDBG for the 2020 disasters. We know that the biggest natural disaster in the country in that year was Hurricane Laura. And of course, that was exacerbated by Delta a few weeks later that made landfall in basically the same part of our coast. So the housing need there is acute. We know that. We think the unmet housing need for both homeowners and renters is right around $1 billion. And these are people who are low to moderate income primarily. They don't have insurance available and so forth. And so we need to stand that up as quickly as possible, especially since we're 13 months after the fact, getting the appropriation done. And so we want that to happen very, very quickly. And there is a process that has to be followed. So, and I can't guarantee the passage of any particular instrument, but the instruments that are pending in front of Congress now, if they were to become law, we know that at least $1.61 billion in community development block grant funding would go to the 2020 disasters. Now, that is not all for Louisiana. HUD would have to determine what part of that is going to come to Louisiana, and they will tell us within 30 days of the passage of the bill. And then they will publish a Federal Register notice giving the rules for how we're to execute the program. We have to then submit a state action plan. Once it's approved, the line of credit is established, and we get to start executing the program. So that's what it looks like. It never happens as fast as you want, but until you get started, you can't finish, right? And so we're getting much closer to being able to start. And if we don't have an allocation out of the 1.61 billion or whatever it turns out to be for the 2020 floods that is sufficient to deliver the housing program that I just described, one that will address about close to $1 billion in unmet need, then we're going to be working with our congressional delegation, with the administration here, the Biden administration, and all the other leaders in Congress, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, so that in December they will entertain additional funding. So that's the kind of the way forward. I wish I had more specific information today. It's not possible because nothing has yet passed Congress, and I think as Blake mentioned, there's still a lot of partisanship and there's some bigger issues that they have, not more important to Louisiana, but there's some other issues around the debt ceiling and other things that are contentious that they have to work through in order to be able to deliver the type of assistance that we need that really is supported across the board. And so I think we're in a relatively good place, and certainly we're better off than we were last week when there wasn't yet any instrument pending before Congress had any assistance for us in Louisiana. So I'm optimistic, but if for any reason it proves to be insufficient, we're going to continue to work really hard to make sure that whether it's Southwest Louisiana for 2020 storms or Southeast Louisiana for 2021 storms, that we get those appropriations increased.
And Governor, we have just a couple of minutes left. If you'd like to.
Okay, so I will wrap up. I think that's what Sean is telling me. I want to thank you all for covering this event. And again, I want to thank all of the folks at the Biden administration who've been very generous with their time, not just today, but we had some really good meetings today as well. But throughout the course of even before landfall of Hurricane Ida, and really all the members of Congress that we were able to meet with, including all the members of our delegation. And I know that they're all in lockstep pushing forward to make sure that we get timely assistance and that we get it in a sufficient amount and with the flexibility that we need to deliver for the people of Louisiana. And I'm gratified by that. And we take nothing for granted, because as of right now, not a single dollar has been approved for any of these storms. But I think we're getting much, much closer. And throughout this process, which really it will involve multiple instruments, but the bulk of the work, I think, will happen before the end of this year. I really look forward to being able to put Louisiana in a place where we can execute the kind of programs that we need to make sure that we recover. We know our people are resilient. We want more resilient infrastructure. We want more resilient housing. We appreciate the assistance that's available outside of the CDBG program that includes emergency transportation funding. It includes the potential for fisheries disaster relief. It includes additional funding for the Corps of Engineers that could really help on resiliency as it relates to storm surge and flooding and those sorts of things. So we're just gratified by all of that. And we're going to continue to work hard to make the case for Louisiana and mindful that we're doing all of this in the midst of a pandemic that makes it, much harder, but also much more important, because it's much safer for people not to be in a congregate setting and to be able to be in their home or in an individual travel trailer and that sort of stuff. And so we're going to speed this relief just as much as we can. So thank you again for covering this. And I'm sure Sean and Christina will be letting you know when the next press availability will be.
Thank you, Governor, and back to you, Ike.
Thanks, guys. Remember, you can send any follow-up questions to me or to Shauna. So thanks for joining.
Thank you, Ike.